Okay, imagine this. You're standing out on the vast, windswept steppe of northeastern Mongolia, and stretching out before you for thousands of kilometers is this monumental ancient wall.
Yeah, and it's important to stress this isn't the Great Wall, the one most people think of. It's a different system, equally impressive, built by various medieval empires.
Right. For centuries, it's kind of whispered stories about shifting borders, powerful rulers. But what about the actual people, the ones living there day in, day out?
That's the perspective we often miss, isn't it? Those grand narratives. They focus on the empires, the big picture, but skip over the ground level reality, the practicalities of life right on the frontier.
Exactly. And today, that's our deep dive. We're looking at an extraordinary discovery from a remote garrison along this very wall system. It's actually an ancient trash heap, a midden.
Sounds glamorous, I know.
Ah, right. But it's surprisingly revealed this incredibly intimate story of daily life, survival, adaptation for the people living right on the edge of the medieval Liao Empire.
So our mission today is really connecting those big historical texts, these official stories, with this really tangible, nitty-gritty evidence found in, well, thousands upon thousands of animal bones.
You might think, oh, the official histories, they tell us everything. But these bones, they offer a completely different angle.
Absolutely. They unveil this resourceful ingenuity, of a community that's pretty much ignored by those imperial records. So, yeah, get ready for maybe some aha moments that challenge that traditional narrative.
Okay, so let's unpack this medieval wall system first. We're talking an estimated 4,000 kilometers across Mongolia and northern China.
Huge. Built with rammed earth walls, ditches, hundreds of associated structures along it. It's a massive feat of engineering.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Like you said, it wasn't one single unified Great Wall.
No, not at all. It was more like a series of different sections, built over about 2 centuries. Maybe starting around 1000 CE up to about 1220 CE.
And by different groups too, right? Like the Liao, the Jin, the Western Xia dynasties. Probably for different reasons.
Precisely. And our deep dive is zooming in on the earliest bit, the northernmost line. This section was built during the Liao Empire. That's roughly 916 to 1125 CE.
And this part stretches deep into the steppe, into what's now northeastern Mongolia. Really sparsely populated even today.
Yeah, very remote. And despite its massive length, the sheer manpower it must have taken, this northern line. It's not even mentioned in the official history of the Liao dynasty, the Liao.
Which is just bizarre, isn't it? You build something that big and it doesn't make the official cut.
It definitely raises a big question. Why the silence? What was going on there?
We also need to remember this wall wasn't like a modern borderline, a fixed line on a map dividing nations.
Right. Medieval borders were much more fluid, more like zones of control or influence.
So this wall, it probably did lots of things, maybe demarcating the edge of their territory, deterring nomadic raids, sure.
But also likely monitoring movement people, animals, and maybe even collecting taxes or tribute at specific control points along it. It was a dynamic frontier tool.
Okay, so it's this complex frontier zone. But who were the people actually manning these incredibly remote outposts? How did they even survive out there?
And that is exactly where Site 23 comes in. It gives us the answers.
Right. Recent digs at Site 23, it's located just south of their northern wall line, have given us this unprecedented look.
Yeah, the site itself is pretty substantial. It has this large round enclosure and 2 square ones, all built with really solid rammed earth walls.
Which tells you they invested quite a bit in these places, right? It wasn't just a temporary camp.
Definitely a significant investment. But the real gold mine, as you mentioned, is this one midden pit, basically their garbage dump.
Dated to around 1050 CE, so sort of towards the end of the Liao Empire.
And it's not just any old pit. It's incredibly rich, really well preserved, packed mainly with animal bones, over 7,000 of them identified.
Wow.
Plus pottery, some metal tools, things like that.
And inside this trash heap, they found some genuinely fascinating little items. Get this. A Liao toothbrush carved from bone.
Ancient dental hygiene. I love it.
Me too. And also these incised ovicaprine astragali, that's sheep or goat ankle bones with markings on them, maybe used for games. Or rituals.
Could be either, yeah. Common finds in nomadic contexts.
But maybe the coolest find was a rare whistling arrow. It's this perforated bone thing you put on an arrow, and it makes a sound when you shoot it.
And the Liao, the history book, actually mentions whistling arrows being popular back then. So finding one here.
It connects directly. It shows these weren't just abstract soldiers. They were using the known tech of their time, engaged in local life.
Exactly. And there's more from other parts of Site 23, not the midden. They found fragments of metal wheels.
Metal wheels, suggesting what? Carts?
Big ones, likely.
Ah.
Heavy-wheeled carts, which starts to paint a picture of transport and supply. So what does all this mean for daily life?
Well, let's look at those 7,000 bones. The overwhelming majority, like 97%, belong to what the Liao texts call the 5 species important to Khitan culture.
Right, that's sheep, goats, horses, and cattle. The 5th is camels, but interestingly, no camel bones found here.
Probably too far north for them, maybe?
That's the likely reason, yeah, the climate up there.
So mostly sheep and goats, they make up a massive 70% of the identifiable bones. Then horses at about 9%, and cattle only around 3%.
That distribution is really telling. It shows us the backbone of their survival strategy.
How so?
Well, look at the sheep, goats, and horses. The bones show a whole range of ages, from very young animals right up to old adults.
Meaning
They were almost certainly raising these animals at the garrison. It points to a pretty self-sufficient pastoral economy happening right there. They weren't just being supplied from elsewhere.
okay, that makes sense. Raising their own herds.
But here's something really intriguing. A surprisingly high number of bones from very young animals. We're talking sheep, goats, even some dogs, all under 6 months old.
Huh. That many. Why would that be? Is that normal herd management?
That's the puzzle. It could be deliberate culling, maybe to maximize milk from the mothers or manage herd size before winter. Or, and this seems more likely given where we are, it could point to a catastrophic climate event, like a late spring freeze, what they call a zid in Mongolia.
Ah, a zed. Those can be devastating for livestock, right?
Absolutely devastating. And we know they happen in Mongolia. They're even documented later in the Liao period.
Yeah.
It suggests this garrison wasn't living some easy life. They faced incredibly harsh conditions that could wipe out their main food source.
Oh, wow. So a really precarious existence.
Potentially, yes. But regardless, these animals were absolutely crucial. Sheep and goats for milk, wool, meat the staples.
And horses. Obviously important for military stuff. Transport.
Vital. And the young horse bones suggest they had lactating mares, which means they could have been making arag fermented mare's milk, a really important nutritious drink in Mongolian culture.
Makes sense. And they ate the horses, too.
Oh, yeah. The cut marks on the bones show clearly they were butchered for meat and also for hides, every part used.
Okay, so sheep, goats, horses raised on site, multi-purpose. But the cattle?
Yeah.
You said only 3%. What's their story?
Right, the cattle are different. The bones are mostly from mature adults, not young ones. And there's a disproportionate number of, like, feet bones, the parts without much meat.
Okay.
And lots of these bones show signs of being systematically split open.
For the marrow.
Exactly, for marrow extraction. So putting it together, mature animals, meat-poor parts dominating, marrow extraction. It strongly suggests the cattle were not being raised there. They were being brought in.
Brought in. Wait, didn't the Liao mention something about cattle?
It did. It mentions cattle being used as draft animals to transport supplies, things like grain and salt, to border garrisons.
And the metal wheel fragments.
Precisely. It all clicks together. These were likely working draft animals brought in pulling those heavy carts, probably consumed after their working life was over, and then the less desirable parts were left in the trash heap.
That's fascinating. It connects the archaeology directly to those little snippets in the historical text.
It really does. And it shows, while they were mainly pastoralists raising their own herds.
They weren't only relying on them.
Right. There's evidence of hunting, too. Small amounts, only about 2% of bones, are from gazelles, maybe hunted for meat, or perhaps for their horns. The horn cores were clearly hacked off.
Okay, so a bit of hunting. Anything else?
Even smaller numbers of bones from things like badgers, mustelids, and hares. This suggests maybe small-scale trapping.
For fur, perhaps?
Probably. The Liao mentions fur as being important for trade and tribute payments. So again, it fits.
And then there was the fish. That surprised me.
Yeah, over 100 fish bones. Mostly from large catfish and other carp-like fish, cyprinids.
Where would they get fish way out there?
Well, the Kurlan River isn't that far, maybe 70 kilometers away. It indicates local, probably small-scale fishing trips.
A nice change in diet, I bet.
Definitely. And the specific bones found, like catfish pectoral spines, point towards spring fishing, right after the river's thawed out. Imagine getting some fresh fish after a long, monotonous winter diet.
Yeah, must have been welcome. It shows a really flexible approach using whatever local resources they could find.
Absolutely. A varied diet, adapting to the seasons. So, okay, we have this detailed picture from the bones. How does it stack up against the official history, the Liao?
Right, because that history was written later, wasn't it, by Chinese bureaucrats looking back at the Liao dynasty.
Exactly. And their focus, naturally, was on the big stuff. Emperors, the imperial family, grand military campaigns, state rituals.
So animals appear in the Liaoshi, but in specific contexts.
Yes, frequently.
Mm.
But usually as, like, special symbolic tribute, think white horses or blue bulls for ceremonies. Or as practical tribute, like taxes paid in horses, camels, sheep. They also mention official markets, imperial commands about livestock, and hunting.
Hunting seen as military training. Right?
Often framed that way, yeah, elite activity. But the day-to-day lives, the subsistence strategies of ordinary people, like the folks manning a remote garrison like Site 23.
Just not interesting to the chroniclers.
Pretty much. Of little interest. And the texts often give this generic description of frontier soldiers as being highly mobile, living off the land through hunting.
But the bones from Site 23 paint a completely different picture.
Radically different. This wasn't some mobile hunting band. This was a mainly sedentary unit, relying heavily on this integrated, self-sufficient pastoral economy, raising their own animals.
With hunting and fishing as important supplements, not the main course.
Exactly. The detailed, varied, flexible economic reality we see in the bones.
Yeah.
It's just not captured at all by those generic, elite-focused historical narratives. They completely miss this nuance.
It's incredible, isn't it, how these discarded bones become this powerful form of testimony. It's like they give a voice.
To the voiceless, in a way.
Yeah.
To the people who lived and worked and died far from the imperial centers, whose lives weren't deemed important enough for the official record.
They stop being these blurred background protagonists in the Liaoshi.
And become real individuals, navigating really challenging historical and environmental situations. It's just a remarkable example of how archaeology, how material culture can fill these huge gaps in our understanding.
It doesn't just complement the texts, it actually corrects them in some ways.
It absolutely does. It brings this depth, this authenticity that you just can't get from the official histories alone.
So this deep dive into the Site 23 midden, it really hammers home that history isn't only about emperors and big battles.
No, it's also about this quiet, resourceful resilience of everyday people.
It reminds you how communities adapted, how they survived, maybe even thrived sometimes, despite isolation and harsh conditions.
Often using these innovative strategies that were completely overlooked by the people writing the history books. It's a fantastic testament to human ingenuity.
Yeah, history written from the ground up, literally from the trash heap up.
Exactly.
So maybe as you go about your day-to-day, think about this. How many other vital everyday stories are still hidden? Still buried under the surface, just waiting for someone to dig them up?
What seemingly insignificant bits of daily life, like an old bone or a pottery shard, might actually hold the biggest clues to understanding our collective past. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?